Have you ever wondered how it all began? How this incredible world, with its majestic mountains, deep oceans, and starry skies, came into existence? Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and debated stories of all time: the creation of the world as told in the opening chapters of Genesis. Now, before we start, I have a request for you. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts about the creation of the universe. Was it divine intervention, science, or a mix of both? And don't forget to like and follow the channel so you won't miss any part of this journey.
And here's the thing. This story isn't just about how the world was created. It's also about who we are and our place in this vast universe. So get ready, because the narrative of Genesis isn't just ancient, it still intrigues us to this day. To understand this story, we need to travel back thousands of years to an era when people explained the universe through oral traditions passed down from generation to generation. For the Hebrew people, this explanation is found in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Genesis begins with a powerful and simple statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Think about that. A short phrase, yet it carries immense weight. It not only introduces the concept of a creator, but also sets the tone for the rest of the story. The world isn't an accident, it has purpose and design.
But hold on. Before we go any further, here's a little spoiler for what's coming up. In 6 days, God creates everything, from light to human beings. And the seventh day? Total rest. Sounds simple, right? But over the centuries, this story has sparked countless debates. Let's explore this together. In the beginning, everything was empty, a total darkness, just imagine. Absolute silence, nothing visible, no form. And then God says, "Let there be light," and light appears. Can you feel the impact of those words? But wait, here's an interesting detail. The sun and the moon don't appear until the fourth day. So where did this initial light come from? This is something theologians and scientists still discuss today. Some believe this light represents divine presence, a kind of creative energy.
Exactly. This shows that the Genesis text isn't just literal, it's symbolic as well. The light could represent order emerging from chaos, the first step in transforming emptiness into something livable. What do you think about this? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Here, after the light, God continues the creation process by separating the waters. He creates the sky, referred to as the firmament, and divides what's above from what's below. This is where order begins. Before, everything was chaotic, but now things start to take shape. This reflects something profound about the Hebrew view of the universe. God doesn't just create, He places everything in its proper place.
Fascinating, isn't it? Because deep down, this idea of separating and organizing is something we do in our daily lives. Whether it's tidying up our homes or sorting out our thoughts, we're in a way imitating the process of creation. Ever thought about that? And we're just getting started. We've seen light emerge from nothing and the beginnings of order taking shape, but what comes next? The creation of a habitable world, full of life, is only just beginning. God still has incredible and mysterious plans for the remaining days of creation.
Remember, this story isn't just about the past. It continues to echo in today's scientific, philosophical, and spiritual debates. Stay with us, because there's so much more to explore together. Get ready to understand creation in a way you've never seen before.
Okay, we've reached the third day, and this is where things get even more fascinating. So far, we've had light and darkness, the sky and the waters. But on the third day, God says something special. Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And that's exactly what happened. The seas were set, and dry land emerged.
It's funny when you think about it, because the text mentions dry land. But have you ever noticed how the earth is never completely dry? There's always moisture, hidden life within the soil. That detail makes me think that, from the very beginning, creation was full of potential to sustain life.
Yes, and speaking of potential, you know what this part got me thinking about? The word seas here in the original Hebrew is yamim. It can mean large bodies of water, but it also had a more symbolic meaning, like chaos. It's like God was bringing chaos into order, you know?
Exactly. That's really interesting because in many ancient cultures, the sea was seen as something scary, unpredictable, almost like an enemy. But here, God doesn't destroy the chaos. He organizes it, sets boundaries. He creates harmony in what seemed impossible to control. That's powerful. With dry land in place, God takes the next step. Let the earth bring forth vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit trees bearing fruit according to their kinds. And so it was. The ground began to teem with life. Trees, bushes, flowers. It's like the world suddenly burst into color and texture.
Wait a second. Seeds and kinds? Does that mean that from the very beginning, plants were already programmed to reproduce? Like, each seed knew exactly what it was going to become when it grew?
Yes, that's exactly it. It's the concept of according to their kinds. Basically, each plant had its own unique identity. The funny thing is, modern science confirms this. DNA, which is like a life instruction manual, is in every seed. So, even without technology or laboratories, Genesis already hinted at this idea.
Wow. So, thinking about how every tree in the backyard, every grain of wheat in the field, all of it carries some sort of plan? You can't deny that's magical. And now we reach the fourth day. Remember, light was already created? Well, here God says, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And then come the sun, the moon, and the stars to govern the day and the night."
But wait, if light already existed from day one, why create the sun and moon now? Doesn't that seem a little off?
That's a great question. Some scholars suggest that the initial light was more symbolic, maybe a representation of the divine presence. And now, on the fourth day, God is organizing this light into specific sources, like the sun and moon, to govern the cycles of day and night.
That makes sense, especially since when Genesis was written, many cultures worship the sun and moon as gods. Here, the text puts them as part of creation, not deities. It's almost like a reminder, hey, they don't have power over you. They're just tools of the Creator.
And the stars. Have you ever thought about how many there are? Millions, billions, trillions, and each one, even those light years away, is part of this grand plan. It's like the entire universe is connected.
On the fifth day, God decides to fill the world with movement. He creates the animals of the waters and those that fly in the skies. It's said that He blesses these creatures and commands them to multiply. Just imagine, the once silent sea now teeming with fish, whales, dolphins, and the sky filled with birds of all colors and sizes.
Wait a minute. Birds? Weren't there only fish and sea creatures on the fifth day? How are there already birds?
Good question. Actually, in the original Hebrew, the word used can be translated as flying creatures, so that would include birds, but also insects or even other flying things of that time. Isn't that fascinating? Every detail in the text opens the door to new interpretations.
It's interesting how, even with such simplicity, the text is so layered. Like He doesn't just create the animals, He blesses them, gives them a purpose. That completely changes how you view life, doesn't it? And so we reach the end of the fifth day. But wait, the climax of this story is still ahead. We've seen the world fill with light, colors, movement, but something's missing. Someone.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. The sixth day is when creation reaches its peak. God is about to create something entirely different, something unique, special. But wait, we're not giving it away just yet, are we?
Of course not. Let's keep everyone on the edge of their seats, but one thing's for sure. Everything we've seen so far has been setting the stage for something extraordinary. What could possibly come next? Finally, we've reached the sixth day. So far, God has created light, separated the waters, formed dry land, brought life to plants, the seas, and the skies. All of this is incredible, but it feels like something was missing, as if creation wasn't complete yet.
And this is where everything changes. On the sixth day, God creates land animals, those that dwell on solid ground. Lions, elephants, reptiles, insects, everything that moves on land. But that's not the climax of the day. God creates something entirely new, humanity.
Wait, before we get to humanity, you said He created land animals. In the original Hebrew, what word is used here? I mean, did they already have a defined purpose, or were they just more creatures?
Good question. The word used is nefesh chaya, which means something like living soul or living being. It encompasses all breathing, living creatures on earth. But here's the difference. While animals are called nefesh chaya, humanity is created with a special detail, the image of God. We'll get to that. Now comes the highlight of creation. Genesis 1:26 introduces us to something unique. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness.
Let us? Who's speaking here? Wasn't God creating everything alone? Why the plural?
This is one of the most debated parts of the text. Some scholars believe the plural refers to the Trinity, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit working together. Others think God is speaking to the heavenly council, the angels, and some interpret it as a majestic plural, a common feature in ancient language to denote greatness.
That makes sense. Whatever the explanation, the fact that God creates humanity in his image is incredible. I mean, he was making something with no parallel in all of creation.
Exactly. Being made in the image of God doesn't mean we physically resemble him, but that we reflect divine attributes like creativity, intelligence, morality, and the capacity for relationships. It's both an honor and a responsibility.
And then God forms the first man. But unlike everything else he created, here he uses a special process. In Genesis 2:7, it says that God formed the man from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and so the man became a living being.
Wait a second, did you say dust of the earth? That sounds so humble. Why would God choose something so simple as dust to create humanity?
Maybe that's the point. Dust is common, accessible. It shows that while we're created in God's image, we're also deeply connected to the earth. We're a blend of the divine and the earthly, the eternal and the temporal.
And let's not forget the breath of life. That's the detail that sets humanity apart from all other living beings. God doesn't just create, he breathes life directly into Adam. It's as if divine essence is present in every one of us. Now that Adam is created, God doesn't leave him just anywhere. He places him in a special garden, Eden. The text says the garden had all kinds of trees pleasing to the eye and good for food. And in the middle of the garden were two important trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Okay, but why two such symbolic trees? What was their purpose? Doesn't this make the story even more complicated?
Great question. The tree of life represents immortality, an eternal connection with God. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil symbolizes the ability to choose, to have free will. By placing these trees in the garden, God is showing that humanity isn't forced to follow him. We have the freedom to make our own choices.
That's deep. God gave us freedom, but with it comes responsibility. It's not just about living in Eden, it's about how we choose to live. So far we have a complete world full of life and a man created in God's image. But something is still missing. In Genesis 2:18, God says, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him."
Suitable. I've always been intrigued by that word. What does it actually mean?
Suitable comes from the Hebrew ezer kenegdo. Ezer means helper, but not in a servile sense. It's more like a strong partner, someone who complements. And kenegdo means something like corresponding to or facing. So Eve was created to be an equal partner, someone who shares the same essence and purpose.
So that changes everything. It's not just about creating someone for Adam. It's about building a relationship based on equality and interdependence, way ahead of its time.
Absolutely. And here's the most incredible part. God causes Adam to fall into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and from it, he forms Eve. When Adam sees her for the first time, he exclaims, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." It's a moment of pure connection.
And so the sixth day comes to an end. God looks at everything he has created, light, land, seas, plants, animals, and finally humanity, and declares it all very good. It's as if the entire universe is in perfect harmony.
But will this harmony last? Adam and Eve are in Eden, in perfect communion with God and creation. But with freedom comes choices, and choices bring consequences. Will they be able to maintain this perfection? After 6 incredible days of work, creating everything that exists, light, land, skies, seas, plants, animals, and of course humankind, God does something unexpected. He rests. In Genesis 2:2-3, it says that on the seventh day, God finished the work he had been doing and rested. He even blessed and sanctified that day.
Wait a second. Why would God, being all-powerful, need to rest? Does he get tired? That doesn't make much sense.
Good question. Actually, God's rest here isn't about physical fatigue. It's more like a pause to contemplate and celebrate what was done. He was showing that creation was complete, perfect, and that there was room for appreciation. Moreover, the seventh day became a symbol for humankind, a reminder that we need rest and spiritual connection.
That makes sense. It's not just about stopping, but about reflecting, finding purpose. Rest in this context is almost as important as creation itself. Now imagine the scene. Adam and Eve living in the Garden of Eden, surrounded by fruit trees, crystal clear rivers, and animals roaming freely. Everything is in perfect harmony. They have everything they need to live in fullness.
And beyond that, they had something even more special: direct communion with God. He walked with them in the garden, talked with them. It was an intimate relationship with no barriers. I can't imagine anything more perfect.
But here's where an interesting detail comes in: free will. God gave Adam and Eve the freedom to choose, even the freedom to disobey. And that freedom was symbolized by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
And this is where everything starts to change. In Genesis 3, we are introduced to a new character, the serpent. The text says she was more cunning than any other wild animal. And the first thing she does is question Eve. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"?
Wait, cunning? What kind of word is that? In the original Hebrew, it's arum, right? What does that mean exactly?
Exactly. Arum can be translated as cunning, shrewd, or even clever. But here, the idea is that the serpent used her cleverness deceptively. She knew exactly how to plant doubt in Eve's mind, starting with a distortion of God's words.
And that's interesting because the serpent doesn't start by telling Eve to disobey. She begins with a question, prompting Eve to reflect and question. It's a very subtle strategy. After Eve responds that they could eat from all the trees except that specific one, the serpent counters, "You will not certainly die, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil."
What a twist! The serpent not only contradicts God, but also suggests that he is hiding something from them, and that changes everything. Now, Eve doesn't just see the fruit as forbidden, she sees it as something that could make her like God.
And here's the big question: trust. Eve had to decide whether she trusted God or the serpent's words. The text says she saw that the fruit was pleasing to the eye, good for food, and desirable for gaining wisdom. And then she ate it, and she gave some to Adam, who also ate.
And in that moment, everything changed. Disobedience shattered the harmony that existed in Eden. They chose to follow their own will instead of God's. After eating the fruit, Adam and Eve's eyes truly were opened. They realized they were naked and felt shame for the first time. They sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves and hid from God when he came to the garden.
I think this part is very symbolic. They were always naked but never felt ashamed. Disobedience brought a new awareness, but it also brought guilt, fear, and separation.
And when God asks, "Where are you?" it's as if he's not just looking for them physically, but also asking where they were spiritually. They had distanced themselves.
And the consequences didn't take long. God pronounced judgments on the serpent, Eve, and Adam. The serpent would be cursed to crawl on her belly. Eve would face pain in childbirth and a complicated relationship with Adam. And Adam, well, he would face hard labor, sweat, and toil to survive until he returned to the dust from which he was made.
And so Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden, and the entrance to the garden was guarded by cherubim and a flaming sword. The perfect creation was broken, but even amidst the chaos, there was a promise of redemption. Something was coming. After everything that happened in Eden, the disobedience, the shame, the judgments, it seems like all is lost. God's perfect creation was broken. But then, amidst the consequences, something surprising happens. A promise is made.
I promise? Where? I don't remember God saying anything like, "I promise to fix this." What do you mean?
Great observation. The promise is there, even if it's not explicit. In Genesis 3:15, God speaks to the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. This verse is known as the proto-evangelium, or the first announcement of the gospel.
Proto-evangelium. That's a theological term, right? What does it actually mean in this context?
It means that even there, at the moment sin enters the world, God is already preparing the way for redemption. The offspring of the woman is interpreted by many as a reference to Jesus Christ, who would crush the serpent's head, defeating evil once and for all, even though it would cost him suffering like the wound to the heel.
After being expelled from Eden, Adam and Eve begin a new life outside the garden. They leave behind perfection, direct communion with God, and face a completely different reality. The ground, which once easily yielded fruit, now requires toil and sweat to produce.
And it's not just that. The relationship between Adam and Eve also changes. God's judgment points to conflict and hardship. Sin doesn't just affect the relationship with God, but also human relationships and creation itself.
That's true. The world that was very good is now tainted by sin, but even so, God doesn't abandon them. In Genesis 3:21, we see an interesting detail. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them.
Wait, garments of skin? Does that mean there was a sacrifice, an animal had to die for them to be clothed?
Exactly. Many see this as the first sacrifice, pointing to the idea that sin carries a cost and that God from the very beginning was willing to pay that cost.
From there, Adam and Eve begin to build a new story. They have children, starting with Cain and Abel. But even here, the impact of sin is evident. The rivalry between the brothers leads to humanity's first murder when Cain kills Abel out of jealousy.
This part always gets to me. In such a short time, we see sin spreading, affecting not just Adam and Eve, but also their descendants. It's as if the disobedience in Eden unleashed a cascade of problems.
But God remains present even amid the chaos. He marks Cain, protecting him from vengeance, and later gives Adam and Eve another son, Seth, through whom the lineage leading back to the promise will continue.
And it's this lineage that takes us to the central point of the story, Jesus Christ. Throughout the Bible, the narrative keeps pointing to him, the promised offspring who would crush the serpent's head.
Do you see how everything is connected? From Eden to Abraham, David, and the prophets, God is guiding history. Even when humanity fails repeatedly, he remains faithful to his promise.
This makes me realize how Genesis isn't just a story of beginnings, but also of redemption. Creation, the fall, and the promise are all intertwined. God never stopped loving what he created.
And of course, the story doesn't end with the promise fulfilled in Jesus. It continues with the promise of future restoration. The Bible speaks of a new heaven and a new earth, where God will once again dwell with his people, free from sin, suffering, and death.
It's almost like a return to Eden, but even better. There, God will be with his people forever, and nothing will ever break that communion again.
And that's what makes the story of Genesis so powerful. It's not just about the past, it's about the future. It's about a God who creates, loves, and redeems. A God who turns tragedy into triumph. After Eden, it seems like nothing was ever the same. Sin didn't just affect Adam and Eve, but all of creation. The earth, once fertile and abundant, began to produce thorns and thistles. Work, which was a blessing, now became burdensome and difficult.
Not to mention the impact on human relationships. The text in Genesis shows us how sin creates division. First, between Adam and Eve, when one blames the other, and then between their sons, with Cain killing Abel. Harmony was replaced by conflict.
Wait a second. You mentioned the earth producing thorns. Is that a literal curse? Like, did thorns only appear after the fall?
Good question. Some scholars believe thorns and thistles already existed, but came to symbolize the effort and frustration of human labor after the fall. The central idea here isn't just botanical, but spiritual. The fall affected how humans relate to the world. And it's in this context of chaos that God begins to reveal his plan of redemption. Genesis 12 marks an important moment, the call of Abraham. God promises to make him into a great nation and to bless all the families of the earth through him.
Ah, yes. The covenant with Abraham is like a beacon in the middle of a storm. God was beginning to restore what had been broken in Eden.
But you know what's interesting? Before Abraham, there were already signs of redemption. Remember Noah? In the midst of a corrupt world, God chose to save Noah and his family. The ark was a symbol of protection and renewal.
True. Noah serves as a reminder that God never gave up on humanity, even when everything seemed lost. He always left a door open for hope. From Abraham onward, we see God's promise expanding. He renews this covenant with Isaac, then with Jacob, and eventually with the people of Israel. God chooses them as his people, gives them laws, land, and a mission to be a light to the nations.
And these laws? Were they just rules, or did they have a greater purpose?
Great question. The laws weren't just about controlling behavior. They were a reflection of God's character. They showed how to live in harmony with him, with others, and with creation. It was a way to teach the people to trust him again.
So the laws were like a response to what happened in Eden. God was teaching his people to reconnect with him and live redemptively in a fallen world. But even with the covenant, the laws, and the miracles, the people of Israel continued to disobey. They turned away from God time and again. That's where the prophets come in, bringing messages of judgment, but also of hope.
The prophets. They spoke about many things, but one of the most intriguing was the promise of a Messiah. Do you see how this theme of redemption is present from Eden all the way to the prophets?
Exactly. Isaiah, for instance, describes a suffering servant who would bear the sins of the people. Micah talks about a leader coming from Bethlehem. All these prophecies pointed to something, or someone, yet to come.
And this connects us back to the proto-evangelium, that promise in Genesis 3:15. The offspring of the woman who would crush the serpent's head was drawing closer. But think about this. Centuries passed between these promises and their fulfillment. The people were waiting for the Messiah but didn't know when or how he would come.
And meanwhile, humanity's story continued. The fall in Eden didn't just affect the relationship with God, it also impacted social, political, and even natural structures. All of creation was groaning, waiting for redemption.
And that's what makes this narrative so powerful. Even in the darkness, the promise of redemption remained alive. God was at work, even when it seemed like everything was silent. What comes next? Finally, we've reached the climax of the story. After centuries of waiting, promises made to Abraham, to David, and through the prophets, the promised descendant in Eden finally arrives. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of that promise.
Wait a minute. You said Jesus is the offspring of the woman. How exactly does that connect with the promise in Genesis 3:15?
Great question. In Genesis, God says the offspring of the woman will crush the serpent's head, defeating evil. Jesus is that offspring because he was born of Mary, fulfilling this prophecy both literally and symbolically. On the cross, he conquers sin and death, breaking the serpent's power over humanity.
So what happened in Eden? The fall, the separation from God, begins to be reversed through Jesus. He's like a second Adam, but unlike the first, he fully obeys God. And it's on the cross that this victory takes place. Jesus bears the weight of humanity's sin, paying the price that began back in Eden. He takes upon himself the guilt, the shame, and the separation that Adam and Eve faced.
That's incredible. Think about it. In Eden, Adam and Eve tried to cover their shame with fig leaves. On the cross, Jesus covers our shame not with leaves but with his own sacrifice. He mends what was broken.
And more than that, Jesus' resurrection is proof that death, which entered the world through sin, doesn't have the final say. He defeats death and brings eternal life to all who trust in him.
After the resurrection, the story continues. Jesus ascends to heaven but promises to send the Holy Spirit to be with his people. The Spirit is like a guarantee that the work of redemption continues. He transforms people's hearts, restoring their relationship with God.
And that transformation is the beginning of something bigger, right? Like a new creation?
Exactly. When the Holy Spirit works, he starts to restore what was broken, not just in people but in creation as a whole. It's as if the story is returning to Eden, but in an even more glorious way.
And now we arrive at the final part, the new heaven and the new earth. In Revelation 21, John describes an incredible vision. He sees God creating a new heaven and a new earth, where there will be no more pain, tears, or death.
And the most amazing thing is that God will dwell with his people once again, just like in Eden. But this time, there will be no more separation, because sin will be completely defeated.
And the symbolism of the trees comes back too. In Revelation 22, the tree of life reappears, bearing fruit for the healing of the nations. It's a return to what was lost in Eden, but on a much greater scale.
What began in Eden with creation, went through the fall and culminated in Jesus' redemption, ends with the restoration of all things. Humanity's story is a journey back to God, but now with an eternal promise of peace and communion.
And the most amazing part is that this promise isn't just about the future. It starts now when we choose to live in fellowship with God. Restoration is already underway.
So the great message from Genesis to Revelation is this: God creates, loves, redeems, and restores. He never gave up on humanity, and the story doesn't end with the fall, but with ultimate victory. That's the beauty of it all. And so, we've reached the end of this incredible journey from the creation of the world to the promise of a new creation. It's fascinating to see how every detail in the story points to God's love and his plan for humanity.
But this isn't just an ancient story. It's a living message that reminds us there's hope, purpose, and redemption for each one of us. And the best part? This story is still unfolding, and you're a part of it.
Now, if you enjoyed this content and want to keep exploring topics like this, don't forget to like this video. It really helps our work reach more people.
And of course, follow the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Here you'll always find reflections to inspire you and make you think.
So hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear this message. See you in the next video. Until then.